All right, welcome back everyone to Mega Make Europe Great Again. We're diving deep today, really getting into the nitty-gritty of something that's super important for our continent's future.
Absolutely. And I think anyone who's even remotely interested in where Europe is headed is going to want to pay close attention to this.
I couldn't agree more.
We're talking about boosting Europe's overall competitiveness. And we've got this really interesting document from the European Commission called the EU Competitiveness Compass to guide us. Think of it as like a strategic roadmap for Europe's economic journey, right?
Yeah, roadmap, exactly.
It's all about how we can be smarter, how we can innovate better, how we can grow in a way that's sustainable, and ultimately how we can create a Europe where people feel optimistic and hopeful about the future.
And I think what's really cool about this compass is it doesn't just take the Brussels perspective.
Hmm.
It really digs into what needs to happen at all levels, from the EU as a whole, down to individual countries, businesses, even citizens like you and me.
It's really comprehensive. That's what I like about it.
It is.
It's saying, look, everyone's got a part to play in this.
Exactly.
And the big headline, a new competitiveness model based on innovation-led productivity. In other words, Europe needs to unleash its creative potential, turn those great ideas into real-world results.
Yeah, because if we don't, as Mario Draghi warned, we risk ending up stuck in this low-growth rut.
Stuck in the slow lane, exactly.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that.
And this compass, along with some key declarations from Antwerp and Budapest and the Letta and Draghi reports, are all part of this bigger push for what they're calling a competitiveness deal for Europe.
Yeah, it's about getting everyone on the same page, aligned, working towards a shared vision of success.
And so today, we're going to be your guides through this document, breaking it down, pulling out the key insights, and explaining why it matters to you.
Let's dive in.
So first things first, what's the EU's own plan for boosting competitiveness? What are the big things Brussels is going to do?
Well, right off the bat, the compass says competitiveness can't just be, one policy area among many. It has to be like a fundamental principle, a guiding star for everything the EU does.
Baked into the DNA.
Exactly. It needs to be at the heart of all EU action.
And I see the compass lays out two main goals.
Yep, two big ones.
So the first is figuring out exactly what needs to change at the policy level to kick things into higher gear.
Right, identifying the roadblocks, finding the areas where we need to be bolder, more ambitious.
And then the second goal,
That's about how the EU operates, how decisions are made.
okay, how things actually get done.
Exactly. It's about finding better ways for EU institutions and member states to work together, faster decision-making, higher quality decisions, cutting through the red tape, overcoming fragmentation, streamlining the whole system.
So less bureaucracy, more action.
Precisely.
And it's interesting because when you dig into the details, the Draghi report outlined these three transformational imperatives.
Yeah.
And the compass really picks up on those.
Yeah, the big fundamental shifts.
And the first one is all about closing the innovation gap. Now, Europe has a lot of great ideas, but
We do. And actually, fun fact, Europe is already a leader in terms of generating new knowledge and inventions. Our patent output is up there with the US and China. But the problem is we're not so great at translating those brilliant ideas into actual products and services that can compete on the global market.
so it's like we're good at the invention part, but the commercialization, the turning it into a business, that's where we stumble.
Yeah, only about a third of patents from EU universities end up being commercially exploited. So there's a huge gap there.
And to address that, the compass talks about the need to restart what they call a virtuous innovation cycle. What does that even mean in practice?
So imagine a system where new ideas can flourish at every stage.
Okay.
You've got your disruptive innovation, these game-changing ideas coming from startups, but you also need your established industries adopting and integrating these new technologies to become more efficient.
So it's like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly. Both are essential for a thriving innovation ecosystem.
And I see there's an EU startup and scale-up strategy in the works. What's the main idea there?
Well, right now, if you're a promising new company in Europe, you're facing a lot of barriers. Navigating 27 different sets of regulations within the single market, trying to access funding, it's a nightmare.
Not exactly a level playing field.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that the EU only accounts for about 5% of global venture capital compared to the US with 52% and China with 40%.
So we're lagging behind.
Big time. So this strategy is all about addressing these issues, making it easier for startups to not just pop up, but to actually scale up and become major players.
And they even mention a potential 28th legal regime, which sounds pretty radical. What's the thinking behind that?
That's a big one. It's about creating a single, harmonized set of legal rules specifically for innovative companies operating across the EU. So, no more dealing with different corporate laws, insolvency procedures, labor regulations, tax systems in each country. Just one unified framework.
So less headache, more focus on innovation.
Exactly. And hopefully, it'll make Europe much more attractive for startups to set up shop.
And then, to tackle that funding gap, there's the Tech EU investment program.
Yeah, this is where the EU is teaming up with the European Investment Bank Group and private investors to pump money into disruptive innovation.
So putting their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. And the focus is on key technologies: artificial intelligence, clean tech, critical raw materials, energy storage, you name it. All the stuff that's crucial for Europe's future.
The future-proofing technologies.
Exactly.
And it's not all about brand new companies, though, right? The Compass also highlights the European Research Area Act.
Yeah, that's about boosting overall R&D investment across Europe with a goal of reaching 3% of GDP.
So upping our game in research.
Yeah, but it's not just about spending more, it's about spending it smarter. The Act wants better coordination of research funding between the EU and member states, more collaboration among researchers, and freer movement of knowledge and talent across Europe.
So breaking down the silos and creating more synergy.
Exactly, a truly integrated European research ecosystem.
And speaking of research, Europe has been talking a lot about becoming a leader in future technologies. What specific areas does the Compass zero in on?
Oh, the list is long. Artificial intelligence is a big one. They've got the AI continent strategy, the AI factories initiative, and the EU Cloud and AI Development Act laying the groundwork. Then there's quantum technologies, building on the CHIPS Act with a dedicated quantum strategy and quantum act. And of course, life sciences, advanced materials, even space, all seen as essential for future economic growth and strategic autonomy.
And it's interesting to see competition policy mentioned in this context. How does ensuring fair competition actually make Europe more competitive overall?
Well, the thinking has shifted. It's not just about preventing monopolies anymore. It's
Right.
about making sure our competition rules actually support our broader competitiveness goals.
Nice.
So things like revising merger guidelines to take into account factors like innovation, resilience, investment in key sectors,
Right.
and also reviewing the technology transfer framework to make it easier for companies to share knowledge and build on each other's advances.
So collaboration and knowledge sharing.
Exactly.
And there's some really forward-thinking ideas in there, like an apply AI strategy and even a CERN for AI. Can you unpack those a bit?
The Apply AI strategy is about taking all the amazing AI research and putting it to work in real-world applications, especially in industries where Europe is already strong, like manufacturing and automotive.
Bridging the gap between research and the real world.
Exactly. And the CERN for AI concept is even more ambitious. Imagine a massive collaborative EU-wide effort to pool resources and expertise in AI research and development.
Like a brain trust for AI.
Yeah. Applying the CERN model to artificial intelligence with all the benefits of collaboration and shared resources that come with it.
Sounds ambitious.
Very.
And finally, under this innovation goal, the Compass stresses the need for top-notch digital infrastructure.
Of course, you can't have a digital revolution with outdated networks.
Right, the foundation has to be solid.
Exactly. And that's where the upcoming Digital Networks Act comes in, incentivizing investment in next-generation networks, getting rid of unnecessary red tape, and making sure everyone across Europe has access to fast, reliable internet.
The digital backbone of a competitive Europe.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to the second transformational imperative, a joint roadmap for decarbonization and competitiveness.
It seems like the EU is trying to walk a tightrope here, going green without sacrificing economic strength.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Yeah.
But the Compass argues that these two goals can actually reinforce each other. It's about creating the right policies, providing the right incentives for businesses to invest in green technologies and sustainable practices.
So turning the green transition into a competitive advantage.
Exactly. That's the whole idea behind the Clean Industrial Deal, making sure Europe remains a manufacturing powerhouse, even for energy-intensive industries, while leading the way in clean tech and circular business models.
So leading by example, becoming the go-to place for green solutions.
And speaking of energy, how does the Compass address the issue of high energy prices, which have been a real headache for businesses and consumers alike?
Well, the Affordable Energy Action Plan is central to that. It's about tackling those volatile energy prices head on.
Right.
It's looking at things like improving the integration of our energy markets, promoting long-term power purchase agreements for price stability, and even encouraging industrial consumers to be more flexible in their energy demand.
So more predictability, more flexibility.
Exactly. And crucially, they're talking about massive investments in upgrading and expanding Europe's energy grids, which is essential for the clean energy transition.
Yeah, making sure we can actually handle all that renewable energy.
Exactly. Making clean energy not just cleaner, but more affordable and accessible for businesses.
Right, so that it makes economic sense as well.
Precisely.
And to speed up the shift to cleaner production, the EU is also looking at both demand-side and supply-side policies.
Right. On the demand side, things like setting benchmarks for low carbon products and using public procurement to favor them. And on the supply side, a new state aid framework to support companies that are developing and producing clean technologies.
So creating the right incentives and supporting the pioneers.
Exactly.
And what about those energy-intensive industries like steel and chemicals? They face a real challenge decarbonizing while staying competitive globally.
They do, and the Compass recognizes that. It's talking about developing specific action plans for those sectors, like the Steel and Metals Action Plan and the Chemicals Industry Package. These plans will focus on their specific needs, making sure they have access to sustainable materials, and using trade defense instruments to create a level playing field with competitors from countries with less stringent environmental rules.
So helping them adapt without being undercut by less green competitors.
Exact.
And the automotive sector is also going through a major transformation with the move toward electric vehicles. How does the Compass approach that?
Well, they're already in a strategic dialogue with the automotive industry.
Okay. Which is crucial for navigating this transition, supporting innovation in areas like battery technology, and ensuring that European car makers remain competitive.
So working together, finding solutions.
Exactly. And this dialogue is going to feed into a broader EU industrial action plan for the sector, looking at both supply and demand side measures, including the potential role of e-fuels.
So keeping all options on the table.
Exactly.
And it seems like the EU is thinking about transportation more broadly as well.
Oh, absolutely. The Sustainable Transport Investment Plan is about making sure we have the infrastructure in place to support cleaner mobility.
So charging stations, renewable fuels, that kind of thing.
Exactly. De-risking investments in those areas. And there are also specific strategies for making European ports and the maritime industry more efficient and sustainable.
Okay.
Plus, a big push for a more ambitious and interconnected European high-speed rail network.
A Europe where you can get around quickly and sustainably.
One concern with ambitious green policies has always been carbon leakage companies moving production to countries with weaker environmental rules.
hmm
How does the Compass address that?
Well, that's where the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, comes in. It's essentially a carbon price on imports from countries with less stringent climate policies.
So leveling the playing field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Compass suggests reviewing CBAM to see if it can cover more sectors and if its effectiveness can be improved.
Okay.
They're also looking at incentives for carbon removal technologies as part of the ongoing review of the EU's emissions trading system.
So finding ways to make it work.
Exact.
Beyond industry and transportation, the Compass also mentions the future of EU agriculture and food production. How does competitiveness fit into that?
Well, the vision is for a sustainable and competitive agricultural sector that works within planetary boundaries. That means supporting rural areas, ensuring food security for European citizens, and promoting environmentally friendly farming practices.
So good for the planet, good for the economy.
Right. Exactly. And the European Oceans Pact is also mentioned, highlighting the potential of Europe's seas for innovation in clean energy.
Tapping into the blue economy.
Exactly.
And finally, under this decarbonization pillar, there's a strong focus on the circular economy.
Yeah, that's about moving away from the take, make, dispose model and towards a system where we reuse, repair, and recycle materials.
So less waste, more resource efficiency.
Exactly. And that reduces our reliance on primary resources, many of which are very energy intensive to extract and process. The upcoming Circular Economy Act will aim to boost investment in recycling infrastructure and incentivize EU industries to use more secondary materials.
So making circularity the norm.
Precisely.
All right, on to the third transformational imperative, reducing excessive dependencies and boosting security. This seems particularly relevant in today's world.
Absolutely. While the compass recognizes the benefits of global trade and interconnected supply chains, it also acknowledges the growing need to factor security into our economic policies.
Because reliance can sometimes turn into vulnerability.
Exactly. A secure and stable environment is a must for businesses to thrive and invest for the long term. And that ultimately drives competitiveness.
Makes sense. But trade is still seen as vital for Europe's prosperity, right?
Oh, for sure. The EU has this huge network of trade agreements, and it's actively pursuing new ones, like the clean trade and investment partnerships and the Trans-Mediterranean Energy and Clean Tech Cooperation. These are about opening up new markets for European goods and services, but also promoting sustainable investments and collaboration in key areas like clean energy.
So win-win partnerships.
Exactly.
But the compass also warns against becoming too reliant on just a few suppliers for crucial goods.
Yeah, diversification is key. Too much dependence on a single supplier for something like critical raw materials or essential medicines leaves us vulnerable.
Right. All our eggs in one basket.
Exactly. So the EU is looking at diversifying supply sources, boosting domestic production where possible, and building up strategic reserves.
So spreading the risk.
Precisely. And there's even a specific roadmap for ending our reliance on Russian energy imports.
Cutting those ties.
Exact.
And that's where the EU's economic security strategy comes in.
Yeah, that strategy identified those key areas of risk and crucial technologies where we're vulnerable.
So pinpointing the weak spots.
Exactly. And the compass highlights things like stricter screening of foreign direct investment, tougher export controls on sensitive technologies, and using trade defense instruments to address unfair competition from foreign actors. They're also looking at the new foreign subsidies regulation to level the playing field.
So a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly.
I also saw mentions of joint purchasing of critical raw materials and a Critical Medicines Act. Those seem like concrete steps.
They are. The Joint Purchasing Platform for Critical Raw Materials is about increasing the EU's bargaining power with global suppliers.
So strength in numbers.
Exactly. And the Critical Medicines Act is about securing the supply of essential medicines and reducing our dependence on potentially risky external sources.
Making sure we have what we need when we need it. And public procurement, how governments buy goods and services, is also mentioned as a potential tool.
Yeah, there's this idea of strategically using public procurement to support European industries, especially in key sectors and for critical technologies. Given how much money governments spend, this could be a powerful way to encourage domestic production and innovation.
So using the power of the purse.
Exactly. And the upcoming review of the public procurement directives will look at the possibility of giving preference to European companies in certain strategic areas.
Okay, an interesting idea.
Very.
And finally, there's a big emphasis on strengthening European defense and overall preparedness.
Yeah, the compass stresses the need to boost the EU's defense industry through more cooperation and investment among member states. The upcoming white paper on the future of European defense will lay out the roadmap for that. And beyond traditional defense, there's a focus on preparedness for other threats, like cyber attacks, climate change, water scarcity, a whole of society approach.
So being ready for anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the three big transformational imperatives. But the compass also identifies what it calls horizontal enablers, things that need to happen across all sectors and at all levels to support this push for competitiveness. And the first one is simpler, lighter, faster regulation. Who doesn't love that?
Everyone's on board with that one.
Right.
The compass acknowledges that too much red tape is a huge drag on Europe's competitiveness, especially for small businesses.
Death by bureaucracy.
Exactly. So they want to slash red tape with ambitious targets for cutting reporting burdens for all companies, and even more so for SMEs. We're talking billions of euros in savings for businesses.
Billions. That's huge.
It is a huge potential boost to the economy.
And there's mention of these simplification omnibus packages. What are those exactly?
So those are basically bundles of simplification measures that target multiple EU laws at once.
Okay, so a one-stop shop for simplification.
Exactly. The first one's coming soon, and we'll focus on things like sustainable finance reporting and the EU taxonomy, making those requirements more proportionate and easier for companies to handle.
Streamlining things.
Exactly.
And they're even introducing a new definition of small mid-caps for regulatory purposes. What's the significance of that?
Well, it recognizes that companies that are bigger than your typical SME, but still smaller than a large corporation, often face unique challenges when it comes to regulation. So this new category allows the EU to tailor simplification measures specifically for them, helping them to grow and compete.
So making sure everyone benefits.
Exactly.
And digitalization is also seen as a key tool for cutting red tape, right?
Absolutely. Moving towards digital formats for administrative processes, promoting the use of e-invoicing, making it easier for businesses to interact with public administrations online, all of that will contribute to reducing bureaucracy.
So less paperwork, more clicks.
Exactly. And the European Business Wallet is a great example. One digital platform for companies to manage their interactions with government agencies across the EU.
That sounds like a game changer.
It could be.
And to make the single market work effectively, there's a big emphasis on ensuring EU rules are consistently applied and enforced across all member states.
Absolutely. No more fragmentation, no more gold plating, where individual countries add extra layers of regulation on top of what the EU requires.
The truly level playing field.
Exactly. And they also want to ensure that this commitment to better regulation is upheld throughout the entire EU lawmaking process.
So baking it into the system,
Precisely.
the second horizontal enabler is all about making the most of the single market. It's been around for a while, but it seems like there's still room for improvement.
There is. The Compass points out that market integration has actually slowed down in recent years. There are still barriers to the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people.
So some cracks in the foundation.
Yeah, some cracks that need fixing. And the horizontal single market strategy aims to revitalize the governance of the single market, remove those barriers, and prevent new ones from emerging. And they're beefing up the Single Market Enforcement Task Force to make sure EU rules are actually implemented on the ground.
So putting some teeth into enforcement.
Exactly.
And there's also talk about faster, more accessible standard-setting processes. Why is that important for competitiveness?
Well, especially in rapidly evolving fields like tech, the ability to quickly establish industry-wide standards is crucial for driving innovation and market uptake.
So keeping pace with the times.
Exactly. The current system can be slow and cumbersome. Plus, we need to be actively involved in global standard setting to ensure those standards align with European interests.
So having a seat at the table.
Precisely.
The third horizontal enabler focuses on finance and competitiveness and the idea of a savings and investments union. Sounds like a lot of money is needed to achieve all these goals.
Oh yeah, massive amounts. The Compass estimates we need an extra 750 to 800 billion euros of investment every year until 2030 to meet our targets in areas like the green transition and digital infrastructure.
That's a lot of zeros.
It is. And the key challenge is mobilizing both public and private capital on that scale.
And the Compass points out that the EU relies too heavily on bank debt for financing. Why is that a problem?
Well, European households actually save a lot, but those savings aren't always finding their way into productive investments within the EU.
So the money's there, it's just not being channeled effectively.
Exactly. And we tend to rely more on bank loans than on equity financing compared to other major economies. The strategy on a savings and investments union wants to change that. It aims to promote low-cost saving and investment products and break down barriers to cross-border investment within the EU.
So making it easier for savings to flow to where they're needed most.
Exactly. And there's also talk about better economic coordination among member states and a refocused EU budget to support these competitiveness goals. The revised economic governance framework is about aligning fiscal policies with growth objectives, and the EU budget itself might get a makeover to prioritize spending that directly boosts competitiveness.
So aligning priorities and spending smarter.
Exactly. And they'll be leveraging the European Investment Bank Group and other financial institutions, plus using financial instruments to de-risk private investments.
Making it less risky to invest in Europe's future.
Precisely.
The fourth horizontal enabler puts people at the center, focusing on skills, quality jobs, and social fairness. It's about making sure a competitive Europe is also a good place to live and work for everyone.
Absolutely. The Compass recognizes that Europe has a skilled workforce, but there are still gaps and shortages in certain areas. The initiative to build a union of skills is about tackling that through more investment in education and training, promoting lifelong learning, strengthening vocational programs, and making it easier for people to work across the EU.
So equipping people with the skills they need to thrive in the modern economy.
Exactly. And it's not just about having the right skills, it's about the quality of those jobs. The upcoming Quality Jobs Roadmap and Affordable Housing Plan will address things like fair working conditions, decent wages, work-life balance, and access to affordable housing.
So making sure people can afford to live and have a good quality of life.
Precisely. And modernizing social protection systems is also key to support workers through these ongoing transitions.
Providing a safety net.
Exactly.
And finally, the fifth horizontal enabler is about getting everyone to work together better through a competitiveness coordination tool. It sounds like an attempt to overcome fragmentation.
That's the main idea. The Compass points out that industrial and research policies are often fragmented across the EU.
So everyone doing their own thing.
Exactly, which leads to inefficiencies and missed opportunities. The competitiveness coordination tool aims to align policies and investments at both the EU and national levels for strategic projects.
So breaking down silos and working together.
Precisely. It'll be linked to the European semester and next generation EU funds, and it'll focus initially on pilot areas like energy, transport, digital infrastructure, AI, biotech, and critical medicines.
So testing the waters in key areas.
Exactly. And they might even use financial incentives through a new competitiveness fund in the next EU budget to support these coordinated efforts.
So putting their money where their mouth is again.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a pretty comprehensive overview of the EU's competitiveness compass. Sounds like there's a ton of stuff happening at the European level.
There is. But the key message is that this isn't just about what's happening in Brussels. Achieving these goals requires action from everyone, member states, businesses, citizens. It's a team effort.
Exactly. Member states need to implement reforms and invest strategically. Businesses need to innovate and adapt. And ultimately, we, the citizens, will benefit from a more competitive and prosperous Europe.
With more quality jobs and a sustainable social model.
Exactly. It's about creating a Europe that works for everyone.
And that brings up an interesting point for you, our listener. As Europe sets out on this ambitious journey, what role do you see yourself playing? And considering the urgency highlighted in the compass, the risk of falling behind, what do you believe are the most critical priorities for Europe right now to ensure a future of sustainable prosperity?
Some great food for thought. And the good news is progress on all of this will be tracked and reported on annually through the annual Single Market and Competitiveness Report.
Yeah.
So this deep dive is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation.
Exactly. The journey continues.
And we'll be here to guide you every step of the way. Thanks for joining us today on Mega Make Europe Great Again.
See you next time.